My wife asked if she could dance with her ex-husband at the company party, and my response was to walk away silently, without raising my voice, without making a scene. I just left the ring on the table. She laughed. She thought it was drama. That I was overreacting. That the question was innocent, that I should trust more, let it go, keep smiling. But I already understood everything. Because no one needs to explain what it feels like when your body freezes inside and your chest closes like a door, locking the last chance to believe again. I knew. Her gaze no longer sought me. Caring was no longer a priority. Respect, which should have been instinctive, was becoming a request, a negotiation. And respect, when it needs to be asked for, is already absent. That question, innocent only for those who have never truly loved, was the last push my heart needed to see the truth. I was no longer the only one. Maybe I never had been. There was no shouting, no arguing. There was silence. The kind of silence that needs no explanation. The kind that seals a sentence without witnesses. And it was into that silence that I left. No slamming of the door. No movie scene. I just left. And when I left everything behind, the memories, the plans, the lazy Sundays, the notes on the mirror. I even left her favorite cup, the one I always used to bring her coffee in bed when she said the world outside was too heavy. I left everything, including the desire to try to understand what I could never understand, how someone truly loved chooses to play with this. And she stayed. She was left with doubt. With the awkward laugh of someone who thinks the other person will come back after their pride subsides. She waited for a message. Let's talk. An apology. But none came. Because I didn't leave to be noticed. I left because I no longer belonged there. And it's strange to realize how love, even the most sincere, can become something suffocating when treated carelessly. I loved her, it's true. But loving alone is like trying to keep a house standing while the other person slowly tears out the pillars. Over time, she realized. It took a while, but she realized. Her ex-husband didn't want to get back together. He just wanted to play with her memory, feed his own ego, relive a past that wasn't even as deep as she remembered. He left as quickly as he came, as if he already knew there was nothing there but wounded vanity. And so she was left alone. Not just in company, but in soul. Alone amidst regrets and silences, amidst unanswered messages and bitter coffees sipped with no one to observe her favorite cup. She began to realize that everything she thought was small, the details, the notes, the attentive glances, were precisely the deepest parts of the love she had had. And lost. She began to realize that it's not declared love that sustains a relationship, but lived love. And she hadn't had that with anyone else. She tried to move on, tried to find the same comfort in other arms. But every touch felt strange. Every laugh seemed forced. And every night ended the same. She stared at the ceiling, wondering at what exact point she stopped caring for what was essential. She began to remember the small gestures. The rainy mornings with coffee. The movies he pretended to like just to be closer. The crises he soothed with a hug. And the times he'd say, "I just want to be your safe place." And she didn't understand. Not then. And it was into this emptiness that she decided to seek him out. Without makeup, without excuses. Just with her eyes downcast and a trembling voice. She told him she missed him. That she understood now. That she regretted it. But he didn't yell, didn't insult her, didn't rub his hurt in her face. He listened as calmly as he'd left. He said he forgave her, not for her sake, but for his own. And he added, forgiveness closes the wound, but it doesn't reopen the door. And there, in that moment, she understood what she never wanted to understand, that true love doesn't shout, but it doesn't beg either. It withdraws. And when it leaves, it takes with it everything the other person would only learn to value too late. From that day on, she began to live with ghosts. Not the ones that frighten, but the ones that remind her. Memories of a pure love, cast aside for a moment of vanity. Images that came without warning, him smiling when he saw her come home from work, him telling her she was his piece, him sleeping on the left side of the bed because she preferred the right. All of this came back as if time were a punishment and memory a life sentence. And, ironically, it was in the small details that the regret became unbearable. It wasn't the absence of love that destroyed her. It was the memory of it. That's when she began to notice what no one else did. He hadn't just left, he'd rebuilt himself. He was lighter. His gaze no longer held sadness, but serenity. And he was no longer alone. He had found a new love, one with calm eyes, a sincere embrace, and uncompromising loyalty. Someone who understood the value of being a priority, not an option. Someone who didn't see love as a testing ground, but as a home. And she saw this from afar. From a distance she herself created. And there, in the midst of that emptiness that remained, she understood the worst part of losing a true love, realizing it won't come back, even if it still exists. She tried to move on. She created routines, trips, hobbies. But nothing fulfilled her. Because the love she lost wasn't just any love. It was the kind life gives only once. And there's no second chance for those who waste what many people spend their lives never finding. The cruelest thing is that she knew he would have stayed. That he would still be there, by her side, building dreams, if she had chosen the right thing over the vain one. But she didn't. And time doesn't forgive those who delay appreciating what is unique. Love didn't die. It simply found another path. A path where it was welcomed, cared for, and finally reciprocated with the same intensity. And when she tried to return, there was no longer room. He had planted another garden, with someone else, and now he was reaping the peace he always wanted to give but never received. And she, well, she was reaping what she sowed, memories. Longing. And that kind of silence that hurts not just because it's absent, but because it's proof of what was once present. But the real pain was yet to come. Because one day, alone in the apartment, she found a box of old things. Inside were notes he'd left scattered around the house, some with love messages, others with little shopping lists he'd made to make her day easier, still others with poems he'd written during work hours just to bring a smile to her face. And it was there, on the living room floor, with the box in her lap and her heart in pieces, that she finally cried everything she hadn't cried before. She cried for every small gesture she'd ignored. For every affection she'd treated as an obligation. And for every time he'd asked, without words, for her to choose him, and she hadn't. And what she discovered that night was the most painful of all: true love doesn't fade away all at once. It dies slowly, silently, waiting to be noticed. And when it finally departs, it takes with it not only what was, but everything that could have been. And no one can live in peace with that kind of emptiness. But what happened after she realized this? How far did his quest for redemption go? And could he, even with his new life, harbor some longing within himself? Or could the new woman, the one with the sincere embrace, also harbor secrets that could turn everything upside down? Now it's too late to change the past. But maybe, not everything has been told. Welcome to the channel. Here, betrayal is not romance, it is destruction. All the stories you will hear are fictional, but they carry profound truths. Our purpose is clear: to show how betrayal corrodes love, families, and futures. If you believe in the value of loyalty, you're in the right place. Now take a deep breath, and get ready for a story shocking, intense and unforgettable. Her name was Emily, his was Michael. And for a long time, the world seemed to turn in perfect time when they were together. They were one of those couples who didn't attract attention for their exaggerations, but for their tranquility. The kind of relationship that grows in the silence of ordinary days, in their shared routine, in the almost invisible gestures of care. They met in a small cafe, the kind squeezed between a bookstore and a florist, and perhaps that was the best metaphor for them. He was the florist, light, careful, full of details that demand constant attention, and she, the bookstore, full of layers, hidden pages, feelings organized behind discreet covers. Michael was always observant, sensitive to what was beyond the obvious. Emily, intense in her thoughts, but measured in her words. Their connection wasn't explosive, but firm. It grew over time, like a river that finds its way between the rocks without ever losing its course. Their first years together were filled with discovery. Michael was captivated by the way Emily bit her lip when she concentrated on reading, by the way she organized books by emotion rather than author or genre. Emily, on the other hand, felt safe in Michael's arms, as if the world outside could fall apart and he would still hold her together, with that calm gaze and rare patience. He wasn't a man of words, but of actions. He would pump gas into her car without warning, fix small things around the house without fuss, and had the gift of listening without interrupting, an increasingly rare talent. She, on the other hand, was more rational, handling her feelings with a certain caution, perhaps out of fear of being hurt, perhaps because she had never felt anything so stable before. But even with these differences, they built something strong, based on small daily commitments that only those who truly love understand. They bought a small house with large windows and walls that still smelled of fresh paint when they moved in. It was the beginning of a life. They planted a tree in the backyard within the first month, and it grew with them, steady, silent, as if understanding it had been planted there as a symbol of something greater. The days turned into years. Dinners at home, short trips during the holidays, lazy Sundays where they read together on the couch in silence. They weren't perfect. They fought over petty things, disagreed on decisions, but they always found a way back. Michael had a particular way of apologizing. He didn't use words, only gestures. Emily already knew this pattern. Sometimes it was tea at the end of the night, sometimes a lingering touch, other times a simple, "Stay," said in the silence. And she stayed. Because, despite their differences, there was trust. There was surrender. Friends commented that they seemed like an island in the midst of chaos. A calm relationship in times of haste. And perhaps that's why, over time, they began to be seen as something solid, secure, almost untouchable. Emily was always private about her relationship. She never liked to expose herself on social media. She said that what was real didn't need to be proven. Michael respected that, even though he was more spontaneous. He was the type to post a photo every now and then, just to show he was happy. But he didn't complain when she asked for privacy. There was a silent, almost instinctive understanding between them. They woke up and went to sleep together, but more than that, they lived for each other. Or, at least, Michael did. They worked in different areas, had different routines, but they always made a point of having dinner together. Dinner was almost a ritual. Emily loved cooking, even when tired. And Michael helped chop the vegetables, tell her about his day, and listen to her work challenges. They laughed, sometimes arguing about politics and household chores, but they always ended the day together, a blanket on the couch and an old movie on TV. Michael had a special fondness for old movies, and Emily pretended to like them more than she actually did, just to see him smile as he explained the context of the scenes. It was in these moments that he was most enchanted by her. By the silent effort she made to be present. Or, at least, by what he believed to be presence. But as time passed, something changed. Not abruptly. There was no alarm bell, no explosion. It was a subtle shift, like a crack that starts imperceptibly but grows within the structure until it compromises the whole. Michael began to feel that the glances didn't last as long. That the silences were longer. That the laughter diminished. Emily seemed more distant, lost in thought. She claimed to be tired, overwhelmed with work. And he believed her. Because she was never one to create drama. If she said she was tired, it was because she was. But what Michael didn't understand, or didn't want to understand, was that this fatigue had another name. Something he couldn't yet name, but which was already beginning to erode the foundations of what they had built together. Still, he persisted. He gave her small surprises, like leaving chocolates she liked hidden in her purse. He sent her messages throughout the day with phrases she herself had said in the past. He tried to rekindle something that hadn't yet died, but that no longer responded with the same strength. Emily thanked him, smiled, but her eyes no longer held the same light. The absence began to show in the details. A hurried kiss in the morning. A cold response in the middle of a conversation. An excuse not to go out. And still, he kept trying. Because sometimes, when you love someone, it takes a while to understand that the other person is gone, even when they're right there by your side. Michael began to wonder if it was him. If he had changed. If he had stopped being interesting. He began to look at himself in the mirror more often, trying to remember if he had said something wrong. Love, when unrequited, has the cruel power to make the sweetest of hearts question themselves. But he didn't complain. He didn't confront her. He thought it was a phase. That every relationship goes through cycles. And she, even far away, was still there. Sleeping next to him. Sharing the same bed. The same roof. The same cutlery. But something inside her had already broken. And Michael didn't know it. It was a Saturday when he saw her dancing alone in the living room, headphones on, laughing at something only she could hear. It had been a while since he'd seen her so light-hearted. And for a second, he considered joining her. But he stood still, watching from afar. And in that instant, he felt a pang of longing for the woman there, even though she was still in front of him. Emily noticed his gaze and smiled, but it was a sad smile, like someone apologizing without knowing why. Michael smiled back and went back to folding clothes on the table. This kind of silence was becoming common. Little by little, Emily began spending more time away. More meetings, more get-togethers with friends, more events she'd previously skipped. Michael understood. He was always understanding. He told her it was good to distract herself, that everyone needs some alone time. But inside, her chest was beginning to feel that familiar ache of someone slowly being forgotten. She tried not to show it, kept it to herself. Because she believed that if she gave her space, she'd come back willingly. Because love, for him, was never a prison. It was always a choice. And then came the invitation to the company party. Emily mentioned it casually, as if discussing a casual engagement. She said it would be elegant, that he could go if he wanted, but that she would understand if he didn't want to spend the entire evening surrounded by people he didn't know. Michael hesitated. Not because of the party, but because something about the way she said it sounded strange. She, who always made a point of having him around, now seemed indifferent to his presence. But he didn't question it. He said he would go. That he wanted to be by her side. And she simply nodded, with a smile that seemed more like disguised relief. That night, as he watched her get ready, he felt that pang in his chest again. She looked beautiful. She wore a new dress, her hair down, and her makeup was light. But there was something different in her eyes. A sparkle he couldn't quite place. And then she turned and asked something that would change everything, but that part isn't yet. For now, all Michael knew was that this woman, with whom he shared his life, his dreams, his silences, and his coffees, was becoming a stranger before his very eyes. And he didn't know if this was just the passing of time, or if it was the end approaching silently, as carefully as it had begun. The music was loud, the soft lights danced around the room, reflecting off raised glasses, smiling faces, and small, scattered groups of colleagues and companions. Michael held his glass between his fingers, sipping, watching discreetly as she moved naturally through the room. Emily had always been charismatic, with a kind of quiet elegance that drew glances even unintentionally. But tonight there was something else, a different vibe, something that defied logic but pressed against his chest as if the air had thickened. He tried to ignore it. He tried to be rational, to find simple explanations for the uneasiness he felt, like the exhaustion of a busy week or the discomfort of being in a place that wasn't his. But no excuse could quell the growing unease. It was as if his body knew what was about to happen before his mind did. She approached with a slight smile, carrying 2 glasses. She was beautiful, more so than usual, and that, instead of calming him, intensified the feeling of displacement. Michael accepted the drink and tried to smile back, but his expression was cautious, as if waiting for something to happen. And it did. Emily looked away and, with practiced casualness, asked if he would mind if she danced with someone. Not with someone, exactly. But with her ex-husband. She said his name like someone peeling a bandage from a wound, quick, crisp, without making eye contact. The question wasn't teasing or gentle. It was wrapped in a tone of normality that made it all the more cruel. She didn't explain her reasons. She didn't try to justify it. She simply asked the question and waited. Michael didn't answer. Not because he lacked words, but because he knew no words, there and then, would be enough to hold back what was escaping. He just looked at her. Inside, time stood still. The sounds of the room faded. The laughter in the background faded. Everything came down to that question, that suspended moment. What destroyed him wasn't the question itself, but what it carried between the lines. The coldness. The naturalness. The comfort with the discomfort she knew it would cause. He placed the glass on the table beside him, slid the ring off his finger with a slow, precise movement, and left it there, on the white tablecloth, like a dry, irrevocable final point. He said nothing. He simply took 2 steps back, his eyes fixed on hers, and then turned, walking silently among the guests, leaving the room with the posture of someone who wouldn't return. Emily followed him with her eyes, somewhat blank. He laughed, a mixture of nervousness and disbelief. She murmured to a colleague that he was exaggerating, that it was just a dance. But something in her also wavered. For a few seconds, her feet seemed glued to the floor, the air thin. When she finally looked back at the table, she saw the ring alone, glinting in the light. And only then did she understand what had just happened. It wasn't just a refusal. It was the end. An end decided in silence. An end that had been building for much longer than she cared to admit. She didn't dance with anyone that night. She looked for her ex-husband in the ballroom, but he had already left shortly before. She returned home alone, opened the door, and found his coat hanging there, his keys on the counter, as if time hadn't yet touched that space. She touched the back of the chair where he always sat and felt an emptiness, a physical absence so dense it seemed to take her breath away. For the first time in a long time, she longed for his presence with a desperation she hadn't known still existed. But he didn't return that night. Or the next. The next few days were silent. She texted, called, but he didn't answer. Not right away. When he finally did, his voice on the other end was calm but distant. He said he needed time, that he didn't want to talk about it yet. That something inside him had been broken and he didn't know if he could put it back together. Emily felt guilt settle in with a weight she'd never experienced before. For the first time, she realized she no longer knew how to reach him. That perhaps there was nothing on the other side waiting for her anymore. She tried to explain, tried to defend herself. She said it was just a dance, that it meant nothing. That there were no ulterior motives. But as she spoke, she listened to her own voice and realized it sounded hollow. Because she knew, deep down, that this wasn't about the dance. It was about everything she'd stopped being. About what she'd stopped caring for. And then came the silence. A long, drawn-out, cruel silence. Michael left home for a few days. He took only a small suitcase, enough to escape the environment he once called home. He needed to breathe, to think, to understand if there was still some part of him that wanted to stay. He visited a friend in another city, walked the streets as if searching for something he'd lost within himself. And it was there, in an empty cafe, sitting alone with a cold coffee, that everything fell apart. The tears came without warning, without permission. And they weren't just for the pain of silent betrayal. They were for everything he'd given, for everything he'd hoped for everything he'd built with his own hands. And now it lay in ruins. Emily, for her part, began trying to rescue what she had let die. She cleaned the house, organized his books, tried to make his favorite meal, wrote a letter. But she knew it was all useless if it didn't come from him. And he, even with his heart still beating for her, felt something had changed forever. He tried to remember when he began to feel alone in that relationship. When she stopped seeing him. And the answer came not with dates, but with feelings. She didn't betray him with a kiss, with a touch. But she betrayed him with carelessness, with disinterest, with the coldness of someone who no longer sees the other as a priority. Weeks later, he returned. Not to get back together, but to get the rest of his things. She waited for him, sitting in the living room, her eyes red, her hands trembling. He entered and greeted her with a brief wave. And there, in the tense silence of the room, she spoke. She said she'd made a mistake. She never thought she'd lose him for so little. She just wanted to see if there was still something there from the past, but now she knew, it was Michael she loved. Not her ex. He never was. Her ex was nothing more than a shadow, a memory. Michael was present. He was life. He was love. But he didn't respond right away. He walked to the bedroom, picked up the last box, took a deep breath, and looked at her. Then, in a low voice, she said she had one last thing to say. She took a small box from her pocket. It wasn't the ring. It was a small envelope. Inside were several old notes he'd written to her over the years. Little pieces of paper left on her mirror, in her purse, on her pillow. She opened one and read, "You are my safe place." Her hands were shaking. Michael continued to look at her, and with teary eyes, she said that for a long time, she was, indeed, his place. But that place ceased to exist a long time ago. Because love without care dies slowly, and hers died without realizing it. Emily tried to hold back her tears. She asked for a chance. She said she would do things differently. That she wanted to start over. But he didn't respond with promises. He just said he needed to take care of himself now. That he'd spent years trying to save something on his own, and now it was time to save himself. And then, with a firm look in his eyes, he added, "I forgive you. But forgiveness isn't an invitation to come back. It's just my way of moving on." She sat there, the notes in her hands, his scent still lingering in the air. And in that moment, the truth hit her hard, what she had lost wasn't just a man. He was the only one who knew how to love her even on the days when she couldn't even love herself. And that kind of love doesn't come around twice in a lifetime. But what she didn't yet know, was that fate would prepare an unexpected reunion, with a revelation she never imagined she'd hear. Because true karma was yet to come. Time passed as it always does after a storm, without warning, without haste, and without mercy. Emily remained in that house for a few more weeks, like someone who insists on living somewhere after a fire, even knowing the walls still smell of smoke and the ceiling could collapse at any moment. Deep down, she knew he wouldn't return, but the human mind is a strange place, it clings to the impossible when it can't handle what's real. And reality hurt. It was cold, dry, cutting. Michael was gone. Not with anger, not with hate. But with his dignity intact and his heart too broken to make room again. And that was the part that destroyed her most, realizing he left without yelling, without begging, without trying to make her feel guilty. He just left. And it was in that silence that she understood the depth of her loss. Everyday life became her greatest punishment. Every space in the house bore traces of him. The perfume she still smelled on the pillows, the shirts she couldn't bring herself to throw away, the books he arranged in reading order. Even the toothbrush nook in the bathroom seemed to mock his absence. And it was precisely in her attempt to reorganize her routine that she stumbled upon what would be the final blow from her own conscience. She was cleaning out one of the dresser drawers when she found a small, dark wooden box with a discreet ribbon. She couldn't remember seeing it before. Opening it, she found dozens of folded papers. They were letters. Letters he had written during their marriage and never delivered. Letters that began with, "Today I missed you, even though you were sleeping next to me," or, "I wanted to tell you I still love you, but I'm afraid of suffocating you with a feeling that seems to be mine alone." Each line was a muffled cry, a silent plea for her to see how much he fought for them even when she no longer did. It was there, kneeling on the floor, her hands trembling and her face wet with tears, that Emily understood the extent of the betrayal she had committed. Not with another man, but with love itself. Michael, on the other hand, was different. The first few days away were hard, like a body trying to relearn how to breathe after nearly drowning. But he was a silent man, and within his silence lay a whole universe of resistance. Little by little, he began to reorganize his life. He rented a small, simple apartment, but one that smelled of a new beginning. He bought a new sofa, a set of dishes, a coffee maker, one of those modern ones he'd always wanted but never bought because Emily preferred filtered coffee. He created a routine of his own, without having to constantly give in, without having to ask for space to exist. And it was in this silent process that he met someone. Someone who didn't come to fill a void, but to add to it. A serene woman, with a calm gaze, who listened to him unhurriedly, who respected his silences, who demanded nothing but the truth. He didn't fall in love suddenly. It was slow. Because wounded hearts don't give in easily. But, for the first time in a long time, he felt seen. The reunion with Emily happened by chance. A year later. She was walking into a small bookstore, and he was leaving with his new partner at his side. The world seemed to stop for a second. Their eyes met. She froze. He simply smiled lightly and nodded. There was no hurt on his face. There was peace. Emily felt her body shiver. Not from jealousy. But from recognizing in his eyes what she had ignored for so long, a calm love, a true love, that now belonged to someone else. And she was alone. Not because there were no suitors. But because no one else was him. And no one else looked at her the way he did. That bookstore became a symbol for her. She began to visit it often, as if to touch the memory of what she had lost. But memories, however vivid, are no substitute for the present. They are merely reminders that time cannot be returned. Emily tried to move on. She rebuilt her career, traveled, immersed herself in courses and new experiences. But no new landscape could erase the absence of the home she herself destroyed. Old friends drifted away. Not out of resentment, but because she was no longer the same. And anyone who has ever experienced true love easily recognizes the void it leaves. One rainy afternoon, while organizing her books, she found one of Michael's old notes that had escaped from the box. It simply said, "May you never have to lose what you have to learn to appreciate it." She read that sentence over and over, as if trying to tattoo a lesson on her soul. Michael built a new life. He had to relearn how to trust, how to open up space without fear of being hurt again. But he did it. And, with his new partner, he found a peace he never knew existed. It wasn't a noisy happiness. It was a quiet fulfillment, made of mutual respect, of real presence, of gentle love. He didn't talk much about the past. He didn't harbor anger. But there was one certainty within him: he had done all he could. And when it was no longer possible, he had the courage to walk away. Emily began to live with the company of what-ifs. What if you had said no to that dance? What if you had understood the cry for help in his silences? What if I had loved with more intention? But none of these questions found answers. Because love, when neglected, fades. And when it fades, it doesn't wait to be called back. One day, she wrote a letter. Not to deliver. But to tell herself everything she'd never had the courage to admit. She said, among other things, that she had only understood what love was when she no longer had it to feel. That she had traded the essential for the ephemeral. And that, now, all that was left was to accept. Accept that some mistakes cannot be fixed. That some choices cost the most precious thing. And so, the two moved on. On different paths. He, rebuilt, serene, with a new life full of meaning. She, with lighter baggage, but with a scar that would never fade. And this is the truth that many ignore: betrayal is not just the act. It's the process of losing what you have, day after day, by not caring, by not listening, by not paying attention. Betrayal is neglect. It's absence. It's ceasing to love while you're still there. And that exacts a heavy price. If you've made it this far, comment, what would you have done in Michael's place? And in Emily's place? Did this story touch you? Share your thoughts in the comments, we want to hear from you. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Here, you'll find stories that aren't just entertaining, but also real reflections on choices, losses, and consequences. And remember, this channel doesn't condone or romanticize any kind of betrayal. Every narrative here has a purpose: to show how betrayal not only destroys relationships but also erases entire futures. Cherish those who love you. Take care of what's real. Because love, when it leaves, rarely comes back.